Hey guys, welcome back to another Late Night Strange. And tonight, we are going to be talking about Bigfoot attacks and some of the reports that happens in the United States with Bigfoot kidnappings. I know there's been a lot of reports out there of Bigfoot attacking people and kidnapping women and children. The subject itself, it's very touchy. But I just want to put a disclaimer before I start. For those of you who are under 18 or don't like anything that has to do with sexual assault or kidnapping of children and women, please skip this video and listen to something else, because we're going to dive a little bit deep into some of the reports that happens in the United States alone, especially with the First Nation people. So alright, just want to give that disclaimer really quick, but without further ado, let's get started. Without getting too deep into the description of Bigfoot itself, or what they call Sasquatch, I'm just going to jump right into some of these stories of Bigfoot attacks and kidnappings. And of course, we're going to jump right into the Mount St. Helens account, or also known as Ape Canyon. For those of you who don't know about the Ape Canyon account, so in the summer of 1924, a group of gold prospectors stumbled out of the woods, shaking and glass-eyed, to tell a 7-foot-tall ape-like creature or animal attacking them with boulders. So a group of guys described coming upon Gorilla Man near where they had built a small cabin for their gold prospecting. They claimed that they were 8 miles from Spirit Lake when they encountered 4 of these giant animals moving through the forest with erect human-like strides. They were covered in all long black hair, and their ears were about 4 inches long and stick straight up. They have 4 toes, short and stubby. The witness estimated each animal weighed about 400 pounds. They even captured a photo of one of these creatures. But the story really begins when one of them fired their rifle at one of these creatures and struck it 3 times. The wounded animal then toppled off a cliff. But the violence that the men shown to these creatures proved to be a huge mistake, because that night, the men said they were awakened when huge stones began clobbering outside of their cabin. Then they heard and felt giant bodies slamming against the walls and doors. The 8 men-like creatures were out for revenge. The creatures eventually tore a hole in the roof, allowing them to target the person that shot one of their own. Many of the rocks fell through the hole of the roof, and 2 of the rocks struck the person that shot one of their own more than once, rendering him unconscious for nearly 2 hours. After a long night of these creatures slamming their bodies against the cabin and throwing rocks into that little hole, the men said the sun began to come up, which prompted the animals or creatures to break off their attacks and slipped away. The men then poked their heads out of the door, and when they decided the coast was clear, they booked it out of the woods. Tales of giant 8 men-like creatures in Mount St. Helens weren't exactly new to the area. Hunters, lumberjacks, and prospectors have seen massive footprints now and again over the years, and the Native Americans in the area have spoken about the mountain devils. But a few people seriously worried about the possibility of huge unknown creatures being out there in the forest. But of course, all that changed when these gold prospectors returned back to the village that summer in 1924 and told of the story of their battle with these large human-like beasts that terrified them all night long. Another one of these accounts that happened in 1924 involved a man known as Albert Ostman, a lumberjack and a woodsman. He went to an area for a vacation. Ostman had actually heard stories about the man-beasts or the mountain devils who supposedly roamed these woods but refused to believe them. As he was sleeping one evening, he reported or claimed that a Sasquatch picked him up and carried him off while he was still in his sleeping bag. He also said that he was carried across country for 3 hours by the Sasquatch. The Sasquatch dropped Ostman down in a plateau. Standing around him was a family of 4 of these creatures. He then claimed that he was kept captive by the Sasquatch. The captors were 2 adults and 2 children, which held Ostman captive for 6 days. One of the Bigfoots was reported to be at least 8 feet tall. Of course, Ostman did not use his gun on them as they had done no harm to him, so he stayed with the Bigfoot family for a week. He also ate sweet-tasting grass that they gave him. According to Ostman, the female Sasquatch washed and stacked leaves. So Albert claimed that he escaped his Bigfoot family by making the large male Sasquatch groggy by feeding him some snuff. And for those of you who don't know what snuff is pretty much tobacco mixed with menthol or whichever flavor you prefer. And what it is you just sniff it and that's it. And it kind of gives you this nicotine kick in your nostrils. For Albert, he didn't tell his story to anybody for more than 24 years. Just, for the fear of people labeling him as a crazy man. So as more and more Sasquatch stories came out and was in the press, Albert decided to tell his story to a local newspaper. Even till this day, Albert's story has been very criticized, and a lot of people has pretty much came out and said there's not enough evidence for Albert to even prove that his story is real, and it was just more likely the result of his imagination than a recollection. So yeah, we don't know if the story is true or not, but from what Albert has told, he said it is true. But there's been a lot of people bashing him, saying that he just made everything up. But I thought that story was pretty interesting because it happened around the same time, and I thought it would make a perfect segue into our next story of Bigfoot kidnapping women and children. And of course, I have to always mention the missing 411 cases, even though David Paulides doesn't come out and say that Bigfoot was pretty much the culprit or the ones kidnapping children's, women's, or just anybody in general, especially in these national forests. But if you look past the missing 401 cases, and especially look at the First Nation, all their stories, there's a lot of similarities in that itself. So I'll tell you guys a story about the Indians of British Columbia. So they have numerous stories and myth, folklores, just pretty much stories of giants inhabiting forests and mountains. And these have different names according to the local language. And of course, we all know the name Sasquatch, which means wild man. But there's also a name in their language called the Chunaquas, which are the wild women in the woods. The stories of the Chunaquas is pretty terrifying. Most of these stories and legends pretty much revolves around children's. And it's said that if you were really naughty, the Chunaqua, or also known as the wild woman of the woods, she carries a basket and she will dance. And then if you were naughty, she will come and pick you up, throws you in a basket, and pretty much takes you all the way up in the mountains, up in the woods. And if you were still naughty, then the Chunaqua will eat you then and there. But if you were, behaving, or if you were good, then the Chunaqua will release you back. So it was kind of told as a story to keep kids in a good behavior mode. So let's jump back to some of these stories or some of these legends that were told by these Native Americans that live in British Columbia. They also believe that there's giants that live in caves or crude huts in far off places, high up in the mountains or deep in the woods. They are looked upon as huge human-like beings with dark hairy bodies, black faces, and big feet. With the strong smell emanating from their bodies is sometimes mentioned, but their size varies from twice of that of a man to higher than that of the highest trees in the forest. So although some of those myths and giants, figures appear aggressive and dangerous, killing people and devouring people, they are usually depicted as interested in keeping their captives alive to communicate with them. These stories also told that these giants would steal women from these Indian villages. The story that was told was a woman was held captive and taught all the giants how to make fire and how to catch and cook fish. She spent so much time there, she even married one of these giants. So they were so grateful that they allowed her and her giant husband to go and help her people hunt. But stories of Sasquatch kidnapping girls doesn't just revolve around the Native Americans in British Columbia. Stories of Sasquatch kidnapping girls also comes from the Paiute tribes. And this is where I want to put some disclaimer on, because I'm going to talk about something very sensitive. And for those of you who don't want to hear about sexual assault, please fast forward or exit this video. But the story goes, the Mono Lake Paiute girls were out gathering berries in the northern parts of the Yosemite National Park, when suddenly one of the girls who was on the edge of the meadows by the tree was heard screaming. The girls ran over there as one of the girls went to call the men. There was no trace of that girl at all, so she had just completely vanished. The people believed that she was taken by a grizzly bear, or some spirit had captured her. At the camp, the family cried and was pretty much inconsolable, but the people had to go on. The next day, the people started up the hill to trek along the Sierra. While trekking along, they heard a girl crying and upset, yelling nonsensical things. She was moving her hands wildly and pointing back to the wooded area. She told the people that as she was picking berries along the meadow by the edge of the forest when a Bigfoot, or also known as the Pahizoho, came out behind a tree and grabbed her. He was big, reddish, and hairy, and she screamed and screamed and screamed as he carried along off into the forest, and she thought for sure she was going to get eaten by him. But instead, he took her into the bushes, forced himself on her. She said he stunk so bad that it was making her sick and it was extremely painful. She also mentioned that he didn't talk at all, he just grunted all the time. She was too scared to look at him, but could see his reddish big hand and hairy legs and feet, and that even his feet had hair on them. They didn't look human. She also said that after a while he just went to sleep. And that was when the Bigfoot-like creature pretty much let go of his grip, and that's when she made her escape. As she joined her tribe and went back to the village, one thing that happened was later on they found out that she was actually showing signs of pregnancy. During that time, the people stayed clear of her except for her friends and family. 9 months later, she actually had a son that had a lot of red hair and was also very hairy. The people actually were scared at first, and some of the men actually wanted to kill the baby, but the girl's mother prevented them. Later on, the people actually accepted the boy into their group because he was actually a really good hunter and had uncanny natural abilities of sight and smell, and was also very strong. He then married and had children come out looking a little bit more normal, but every now and then, one of the descendants come out hairy and with red hair. Many of the descendants are now scattered in many parts of the Paiute tribes in California and Nevada. There's also photos of these Native Americans with abnormally long fingers compared to their palms. There's also an unusual amount of hair on their legs and chest of the men. One perhaps seems to have hair that resembles a different color other than black, perhaps reddish. Whether these photos were actually descendants of the Paiute tribes or just another tribe in the Native Americans, legends of these Bigfoot kidnappings, children and women just don't end there at the Paiute tribes. There's actually more stories of this out there, and I'll tell you one that's very sinister that comes from the people of Choctaw. So the Choctaw territory was actually in the southeast Oklahoma, which is ground zero for Bigfoots in Oklahoma. The Bigfoots, only referred to as giants, has been raiding human settlements on southeast Oklahoma and Arkansas for some time, mostly stealing vegetables. They have also been stealing human children and apparently eating them. A Choctaw search party was actually organized and led by Joshua LaFleur. This was actually a real person, so he was actually born in the Choctaw Nations in 1796 and died in Indian Territory in 1855. So whether this story was actually real or fake, there's been reports of Joshua actually forming a party to go search down these Bigfoots that has been kidnapping these children. So upon tracking these Bigfoots, they come upon this huge giant mound that had 19 children bodies on it that has been reportedly eaten by these Bigfoots. And while coming upon this mound, they were actually approached by two Bigfoots, and without hesitation, Joshua opens up his revolver at one of them, but it proved to be useless. Even before he could, reload, the Bigfoot kills Joshua with a single blow, then tears off his head, as reported. Back in the days, the Choctaw Indians were actually equipped with 50 caliber sharp buffalo rifles, and what they believed was if they were to shoot in the head, they would kill the beast, and that's exactly what they did. They opened up on one of them, killing that one instantly, and then the one that actually killed Joshua took off running. So the Choctaw Indians then hunted down that Bigfoot that killed Joshua and finished it off with the hunting knife. As reported, they then decapitated the Bigfoot for good measures, just to kind of get that revenge for Joshua. So I'm not quite sure if this story is actually real or not, but just going through all the comments and stuff like that, some of the people from the Choctaw Nation do acknowledge that, even though the story might have just been kind of exaggerated, a lot of these kidnappings and stealing of human children actually, did happen. Soon after the battle, the Indians actually buried what's left of the kids and then buried their later Joshua, giving him 21 gun salute, then making a bonfire and burning all of the Bigfoot remains in it. But that was one of many stories that came out of Choctaw Nation. But no matter which tribe you ask, I know there's like maybe a few of them out there that don't believe in Sasquatch. But we all know that the Native Americans have talked about these creatures for centuries. So let's go back to that one story where that Paiute girl was kidnapped by that reddish-haired Bigfoot and had a baby. So I'm not quite sure how close you guys follow any of the updates of Bigfoot, reportings or sightings or even DNA testing. But yeah, I said it, DNA testing. For those of you guys who don't know, a lot of these Bigfooters, they'll go out and they'll cast these footprints of these Bigfoots, and alongside with that, they'll find hair samples. And most of these hair samples will be sent to Melba Ketchum, who is a DNA diagnostic located in Texas. But back in 2012, indicated that Bigfoot is a hybrid from over 15,000 years ago that was in between of a human woman and an unknown primate. So this claim in itself actually made national news. It was also suggested that such cryptids had sex with modern human females that resulted in hairy hominid hybrids. So in Melba Ketchum's own words, that our data indicated that the North American Sasquatch is a hybrid species, the results of males of an unknown Homo species crossing with the female Homo sapiens. And a lot of you guys are probably wondering how these tests were actually done. Well, let me tell you. So the study, which used 111 samples of alleged Bigfoot hair, blood, mucus, toenail, bark scrapings, salivas, and skin with hair on there that has tissue attached, were collected by dozens of people from 34 sites all around North America. Hairs were compared to reference samples from common animals like human, dog, horses, cows, deers, elks, moose, and etc. All these samples that were collected did not match any of these following animals or humans. And because of that, there was a theory that came out saying that human DNAs could have easily transferred or contaminated these samples by simply coughing on it, sneezing on it, or just having a drop of spit on it. To rule out that theory, they also went out and took DNA samples of these of the people who actually brought in these samples, just to make sure that their own DNA helped rule out any contamination. But the possibility of DNA contamination by others, such as hunters or hikers, could not be ruled out at this point. So going back to the story of the Paiute girl that was kidnapped by the Bigfoot creature with the reddish hair, I mean, make it what you want, but a lot of these folklores and these stories that comes from our Native American tribes are, they do tell a very, very detailed story that could actually be true, that has been passed down from generations and generations. So that's why I believe a lot of these folklores and legends do have some truth in them. And to have these DNA samples point back to what the Native Americans claim of Bigfoot's kidnapping women back then and breeding with them, I mean, this theory and these DNA samples actually have some backbone and structure to the claims and all the folklores and reports that comes out of the First Nation stories. But take everything with a grain of salt, and I want to hear all your comments down in the comment section below. What you think about all these findings and the stories behind the kidnappings of children and women and the breeding of Native American women's. But for me, I believe there's some truth in all these folklores and stories that has been passed down generations to generations, whether it was dated back 15,000 years ago like that DNA sample, or it's just freshly new. But the truth is always going to be out there. But that is all I have for you guys for today. It is Halloween, so happy Halloween, everybody. I'm going to be taking my kids trick-or-treating right now. That's the reason why there's a lot of commotions upstairs right now. But for those of you who like this kind of content, please like and subscribe. And like I always say, put a comment down below in the comments section. I love hearing all the stories and all the engagement. And I do read every single one of them. But that is all I got for you guys. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope to see all you guys again on the next episode of Late Night Strange. Goodbye, everybody, and stay spooky.